Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Extra Serving, an award-winning podcast by Nation's Restaurant News. I am your host, Holly Petre. This week, we're going to be talking about loyalty programs ramping up again. We've seen 6 new and revamped loyalty programs just in the past few weeks, which is pretty incredible. We're also going to be talking about the report by the New York Times that mentioned the National Restaurant Association and One Fair Wages response. We're also going to be talking about Subway, that's possibly for sale, and Wendy's that is not for sale. So some big news for some big change. So now I'm going to turn it over to my co-hosts.
I am Sam Oches, Editor-in-Chief of Nation's Restaurant News.
And I'm Bret Thorn, Senior Food and Beverage Editor of Nation's Restaurant News.
Holly, you kind of sound like you're being held hostage in a small room.
Is that what I look like as well?
Yes, look and sound. And maybe it's not far from the truth. You found a tiny little closet in our office.
I did. I am going to throw it over to our sponsor for this week's episode before we get too deep into anything. Belgioioso Cheese is a family-owned and operated company specializing in artisan Italian cheesemaking. Using only natural ingredients and fresh, local Wisconsin milk, master cheesemakers handcraft a full line of exceptional cheeses, guided by a commitment to quality and a respect for tradition. Ask your distributor about Belgioioso's award-winning fresh mozzarella, burrata, ricotta, mascarpone, American Grana, and Parmesan. At Belgioioso, every cheese is a specialty. All right, so I am in a small, little, tiny room. I'm sorry to say that I'm in a little, tiny room. Bret and I couldn't even fit in this room together. That's how tiny it is.
It's like a phone booth, if anyone remembers that.
If anyone remembers phone booths, I do. That's what they're like.
Phone booths?
Booth?
Booth. Phone booth. Anyway, moving quickly along.
That could have been a good screen grab for the YouTube. You made a pretty funny face there.
Oh, I'm full of them. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Well, welcome to the podcast, Bret. We haven't had you on in a long time.
True. I'm glad to be here. This is always fun.
He says with a bitter face, it's true.
I'm here.
I'm glowing. I am literally glowing. I'm so happy.
It does look like you have a halo above your head with that the light that's directly above your head. Yeah, it's a very large halo.
You know,
very large fluorescent light.
I'm very holy.
All right, let's dive into the news for this week. So
Let's do it.
A lot of chains launched loyalty programs or loyalty revamps in the past, since really the new year. That's just been 3 weeks. So let's talk about it. What do you guys think about this new loyalty, almost like a new loyalty for the new year?
I mean, everybody, there's just a lot of it going on because I think generally you see a lot of transition in loyalty because of just how many new tools are available to restaurant companies. A trend across the 6 brands that you are specifically referring to, which everybody can see on NRN.com, a piece that Joanna Fantozzi put together, specifically 6 that have updated their loyalty programs recently. A couple of them, more than 2 of them, I think, were around the metaverse and gamification. And so obviously, as we've talked about on this podcast before, loyalty programs going beyond the punch card, even going beyond the digital punch card to leverage these new tools available to customers because of the digital revolution that has happened. And so I do like the direction that some of these are going. Just as an example, Jimmy John's added some gamification elements to their loyalty. Now, theirs is not about VR and metaverse as much as it is, can you order 25 Jimmy John's sandwiches in the next month and a half, which is one of the challenges they had. I believe it was called the Gauntlet. And you know, I think it's clever because it gives people these fun goals that they want to try to accomplish. And again, you can do this in more fun and clever ways using an app than you ever could using any kind of punch card or, you know, low tech tool.
Well, especially like challenging someone, I dare you to spend as much money as you can at my restaurant is, I mean, it's a pretty obvious and good strategy. And as we know, traffic is declining at many restaurants. And so getting as much as you can out of every customer that you get is a logical approach. And games are fun.
They are. Agreed.
Squeeze them dry.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
For all they're worth, get all their money.
Take it all.
Makes them sound just a little nefarious. It's all to the benefit of the customer too. And hey, I think we'll throw out there as well that value is going to be important this year, as we've talked about a lot, especially if there's a recession. Value is already important because of inflation. Loyalty is one tool in the toolkit for value, because there is some perceived value to it, of course. Like you feel earn a free sandwich feels valuable, even if you bought 9 sandwiches to get there. But there's some real value offered by some of these loyalty programs too, because especially now as we get into things with like tiers and levels, which again, of course, you have some complexity available to you with digital. There's legitimately money to be saved if you are already visiting these restaurants frequently, which a lot of people do because they have their favorites.
Well, a lot of these loyalty programs also kind of speak to the personality of each brand, which I think makes customers feel a little bit more connected, which
True.
is certainly what everyone is looking for in their customers, to engage them more. And then there's technology that allows restaurants to collect more data on their customers and therefore customize the sorts of offers that they can give them that will appeal to them. And that helps too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm personally excited about Cha-Cha Matcha's new entrance into the metaverse. I'm a big Cha-Cha Matcha fan, so pretty excited about that one on a personal note.
That was one of the metaverse ones, wasn't it?
Yep, that's one of the metaverse ones. It's exciting. Here's what I'll take.
I was going to say, I'm not even familiar with Cha-Cha Matcha, and here they are going into the metaverse.
So I think that's really interesting that a small chain is diving into the metaverse like that.
Yeah.
I think they have under 10 locations. So definitely a very small chain that's really diving in deep. And so I'm pretty excited about that. But they have a very loyal fan base. I mean, there's always lines. It's busy. So I can definitely see that they are ripe for the metaverse and ripe for expansion, to be perfectly honest.
That's an interesting loyalty perk, skipping the line. Maybe that's something that restaurants should try.
Yeah.
Some of them are. I know some of them are doing that as part of their loyalty program, like at a certain tier.
That was the one that I did on Takeaway a few weeks back, the name of which is going to escape me. Therefore, I will not get into it. It was a steakhouse. Doggone it, I have the worst memory. Anyway, they were offering the ability for loyalty programs. And this is obviously steakhouse, you could skip the line if you did not have a reservation and just get in. So yes, that is a very smart thing to do.
Maybe bump you up the wait list.
Right.
I'm looking up the name. Rib and Chop House.
Thank you. I kept wanting to say House of Prime Rib, and I'm like, I know it's not House of Prime Rib. Rib and Chop House.
Rib and Chop House.
Sorry, Rib and Chop House.
It was a very good interview. I do recommend listening to it.
That's a good callback.
What's your name again? Rib and Chop House?
Rib and Chop House. Yes,
Rib
thank
and
you.
Chop House.
All together now. No, I'm just kidding. Let's move on.
Please, let's move on to something that's a little controversial. We're going to talk about the New York Times piece that was released this week. We can't not talk about it. It was very controversial, especially for us in the B2B space. We deal with the National Restaurant Association a lot. We deal with One Fair Wage a lot. And so it was pitting these two really against each other in this sort of expose that took a lot of shots at the NRA. So I know we're all have to tread carefully here, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, look, okay, so I guess I'll start by saying, yeah, we're close to this story in a way just because we do interact with the National Restaurant Association. And I'll caveat too that I don't think any of the three of us here are exactly lobbyist sympathizers. So that will set the table here. I'll just say I'm extremely disappointed in the New York Times for this story. It felt like a hit piece. And it to then get the news that came out the day after the story just felt really like all of it felt very coordinated. So just as a summary, New York Times journalists write what they sort of position as this expose that the National Restaurant Association's ServSafe food safety training program. That National Restaurant Association owns ServSafe, and yet restaurant employees are required to pay $15 to take this training. And
restaurants are required to pay, just restaurants in general.
Employees are required to do the training. It costs $15 to do. And the New York Times connected some dots that I don't think were really connectable. But so New York Times positions a whole story around this theory that therefore employees are paying a lobbyist that is actively trying to keep their wages down. So that's and One Fair Wage is all over this story. One Fair Wage is an activist organization that is trying to raise the minimum wage. So let's also throw in that neither the National Restaurant Association nor One Fair Wage is a good guy or a bad guy here. Like, let's just throw both of them have their objectives. That's just where we'll say what we'll say too. But where the story comes out is, again, making some pretty unsubstantiated claims. And I think in particular, as you said, Holly, in particular, they are saying that employees are paying this $15, and therefore out of the pockets of employees is this fee that goes to what the NRA has, or the New York Times has positioned as like this sort of bad guy NRA trying to keep them down. And all of that is just so erroneous and just so false. And I think probably if you're listening to this, you probably are, I'm guessing, in agreement, but most restaurants probably, I'm guessing, I have no data on this, probably most restaurants pay their employees to take that training. So right out off the bat, that claim is just, to me, bogus. And the whole story falls apart right there, because to suggest that the employees are paying the lobbyist, they're probably not. Now, some maybe are, but again, I just don't think that that's probably true. But then for the day after this story comes out, One Fair Wage says, oh, by the way, we have created our own version of ServSafe, a food training program that costs $10, and that the money will go toward activism to raise the minimum wage, which fine, as it's on its face value. Sure. Okay. That's great that there is an alternative, but for it to happen the day after the story comes out, it's like, man, it all feels like all of this was coordinated in a way that is just totally unfair, bad journalism. The three of us can say that this was bad journalism. I would not be surprised to see that on a cable news network. I'm very surprised to see that out of the New York Times. Honestly, I think there should be a retraction. The NRA has not spoken, and I think maybe that's for the best because they just don't want to give it oxygen. I don't know. I'm just very surprised that that story ever saw the light of day, because it was essentially a piece fueled, encouraged, and informed by an activist group with an objective.
And as far as I can tell, One Fair Wage basically placed the story. I don't know how they managed to do that. They couldn't place a story with us. Nobody could place a story with us. So how they could do it with the New York Times is really, it's terrible.
And to not do some of this fact checking, right? Like that claim that employees were paying the $15, I think that bugged me the most, just because they have no proof that employees are the ones paying that. Now, it is entirely possible that at some restaurant companies that is the case, or maybe it's taken out of their wages. I don't know. But let me throw out there, if you are making your employees pay for that training that they're required to do, don't do that anymore. Like, you should pay for it. It's $15. Come on. But probably if you're listening to this, you're probably a good person, and you probably pay that for them already, right? So, and by the way, the one thing that the NRA, or the NYT, New York Times, said was that the NRA has made $25 million off of this over the course of 12 years. So,
by the way, that was an estimate of what they've made, because they were estimating the number of restaurant workers. So this is a probably ballooned number. So just that needs to be said as well.
Yeah, I mean, the last sort of thing that they say in the story is, I think they're just trying to suggest that this practice of a lobbyist, which the NRA is, that the practice of a lobbyist owning a program that the industry is required to do should not be legal. That in itself, debatable, and people are going to have opinions on that. And I think there's probably some truth there. But again, and I'm biased because I'm close to this story. Let's just say that it's bad journalism, and I think the New York Times should be extremely disappointed in itself.
Also, there are plenty of reasons to dislike any lobbyist group, and the NRA is more than a lobbyist group; it's a trade association. We do a lot of things.
Right.
But I don't see any reason why you'd be angry at any organization for teaching food safety.
It's a good point. Yeah, I mean, ServSafe is a good program, right? Yeah. And it goes beyond the training that it does, right? I mean, there's a lot more education that ServSafe does beyond simply a food safety training for employees of restaurant companies. And so yeah. Now look, if One Fair Wages new program is worthy, then great. Like, go take a look at that too. I think there was one other alternative mentioned in the story that sprung up. Capitalism, guys, like, that's great. Like, it's good to have alternatives. So I encourage that for sure. ServSafe shouldn't be the only player in town. But yeah, don't try to connect dots where there are not dots to be connected. We learned that in journalism school. Come on.
Well, and another thing is that Bret and I were talking about this yesterday, is that a lot of servers at small restaurants or restaurants where they get tips like getting the tips. And one of the things that One Fair Wage is trying to do with their new measures that they're trying to get, brought up with Congress, is that they're trying to eliminate the tip credit. That's one of their big pillars, is that they want to eliminate the tip credit. And Bret and I were talking yesterday that most people that we know who work in the restaurant industry love the tip credit. They want the tips. They don't want to be hourly workers. They don't want to be working for $20 an hour because they're making so much more on tips. So there's that as well that's kind of factored into this that the New York Times failed to mention. So there's also that. They also say that the lobbying numbers that were spent were far less than the $25 million that they said. So, I mean, that correlation is already off, that they're spending less on lobbying than they're apparently making. So they're not even spending all the money. If they are spending it on lobbying for that specific reason, which they lobby a lot of causes, it is not just keeping the minimum wage down. They lobby for a lot of things. So
including, by the way, like immigration, like, I think it's important to say, it would be easy to position the NRA as a far right, business interest, money hungry organization. The NRA is very supportive of immigration reform. And, so there's just so much nuance involved that it's just so frustrating to just have this very one-sided take on it.
Well, and the whole One Fair Wage and other organizations that are opposed to the tip credit like to talk about, oh my God, these people are making less than minimum wage, which, if they are, that's illegal. I mean, the whole point of the tip credit is that they have to make more than the minimum wage. And when I waited tables, I made about double the minimum wage when I was waiting tables, and being paid my hourly wage was far lower.
That was because of your beautiful smile, Bret.
Thank you. I'll just take the compliment and leave it at that.
Not everybody has that charm.
No, not everybody has their charm.
And, I think the whole tipping system, personally, it's absurd. Like, why are customers paying the wages of workers rather than their employers? However, it's a system that servers, by and large, as far as I can tell, like. So, it's a lot more nuanced than it's.
And those who have tried to get rid of it went back to it, right? I mean, like Union Square, it's like, tried to get rid of tipping and just didn't work. I mean, that's not what our society is built upon. Now, we could get into the egregiousness of some areas that tipping goes, like robots that require tipping, for example. But that's a podcast for another day. But yes, I mean, as far as tipping goes, seems to work. The tip credit, people seem to like it. And so when one activist organization wants to speak for everybody, I think they got to check themselves and recognize way more gray than black and white.
Well, we could talk about this probably for hours, but I'm going to cut us off here.
Smart.
Just as a safety measure, because we have to talk about some pretty big news in the restaurant industry. I mean, we hinted at it last week on the podcast, but it had not really fully broken by the time we were talking. So we held off on it. But Subway could be up for sale. And Wendy's is not for sale. So, I mean, those are some two big players in the top 10 that we're seeing make some big moves.
Wendy's was never for sale. Well, Wendy's was going to go through something that wasn't technically a sale, but that was going to be more of like a hostile takeover.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I think on the Wendy's front, they're probably relieved because, those don't go very well, right? I mean, so, depends, but, it's a little bit like an activist organization, not to kick it back. Yeah, sometimes people think they know what's best for somebody else, and that's just not true. So that's the case in that regard. Wendy's did announce an organizational restructure to make their organization more efficient. Kurt Kane, one of their executives, is departing the company. Sounds like they're trying to get away from some of the distractions like Reef and some of those other things, get back into standard store development and international development as well. So Wendy's, yeah, that's one thing. Subway is really interesting because Subway, apparently, this is all sort of, well, I guess it's not rumor. I guess Subway's kind of confirmed it, but, exploring a sale, valuation roughly $10 billion. And that's interesting, especially interesting when you consider Subway has fallen pretty far from its peak of many years ago, closed several thousand locations. Franchisees, I think, are fairly disgruntled, was part of one family for 50 years and is no longer, or at least is no longer, has the family, the Greco family as the head of the organization. But it is also 100% franchised. And another sort of interesting part of a sale to where, franchisees, you have thousands of franchisees in the system that are going to want to have a say in who's buying it. So the last thing I'll throw out there too, though, is just like who would buy Subway? Darden has announced that they're interested in buying somebody. And so there's a major American restaurant company that could be in the market for a big acquisition. But your other couple of major restaurant companies in Inspire and Restaurant Brands International, they have sandwich concepts, Jimmy John's and Firehouse Subs, respectively. So I don't know if Subway's going to easily find a home. And whoever does buy Subway, I think, has a lot of work cut out for them for getting that business back to what it can be, which is a value player, but also a perceived healthful option in fast food.
Well, I mean, I would be really surprised if Darden bought Subway, because Darden is a casual dining company and they're company-owned restaurants. They don't think they franchised. Are they franchised? I don't know. But
I don't remember.
Also, Subway is going through a lot of changes. They're working on things. They were probably the inventor of the whole customize everything format. And they've gotten away from that and have a lot of curated sandwiches now that are at the center of their menu. And that's something they introduced last year and probably are still figuring that out. So, maybe it will be the thing that turns Subway around, or maybe Subway is just so massive that turning it around is not in the cards. I don't know.
Yeah, turning the cruise ship around and then some. Quick fact check, live fact checked on myself. The DeLuca family. I say Greco because I was thinking of Suzanne Greco, Fred DeLuca's sister, who took over the company briefly. The DeLuca family owns Subway. Yeah, thanks. I don't know. It's not to like kick a horse while it's down, as it were, or kick a dead horse or whatever the phrase is. But, Subway, I think it has been wandering for a long time, and a sale could be very good for it. But to have 22,000, I think, locations, and
that's just in the another 11,
and just in the US, I think it's like 37, maybe globally. And again, many thousands of franchisees. Whoever takes over is just going to have a lot of work cut out for them. So I think there's not a lot of optimism that Subway finds a buyer very quickly. Let's put it that way.
Well, it has to be private equity. I mean, at this point, that's kind of their only option. $10 billion is
$10 billion, right?
Yeah, $10 billion is insane. I mean,
I'm not going to buy Subway.
You don't have $10 billion?
No, believe it or not, this position does not pay multiple billions per year. But I don't know. You guys want to go in on it together? Maybe if we pooled our money.
The three of us can go in on Subway.
Excuse me, Subway. We don't have 10 billion, but would you take 100?
$100.
Yeah. $100. Yeah, sorry.
Well, they have really low AUVs at Subway, which is, surprising because they have so many units, but their AUVs are so low. And I think that's the first thing that really needs to be attacked by whoever buys Subway. I think that's the absolute first thing that they need to attack is bringing up AUVs at restaurants, because that is a crucial thing. If they bring up the AUVs by 2% across the board, that's going to give Subway such a boost. I think they wanted to do that with the pre-made sandwiches, but I think it's just changing Subway's image.
Yeah, go ahead, Bret.
Well, I was going to say, as Ron Ruggles reported on, that's on Subway's agenda too. It's not opening more locations; it's improving sales at individual locations, which seems the smart way to go. You don't have you have a bad business.
Well, and to that end, with happy franchisees, I mean, of course, one of the sort of things Subway was renowned for was just sort of handing out franchises with no boundaries. And that's part of the reason why their AUV is so low, is that they have so many doggone locations seemingly everywhere. And so it's just spreading the money around. So perhaps closing even more locations would be ultimately a good thing if you can find out ways to maximize the sales of each individual location. So maybe that will be in the cards. But yeah, it's a great point, Holly, which is that they need to make more money in a restaurant, because the other thing is, if you make more money in the restaurants, you're going to start to appeal to perhaps some bigger franchise groups. Subway's always been a brand that's mom and pop franchisees, which is awesome. I mean, they provide the American dream to so many people where it could have been out of reach. But you could start to get some access to some bigger players in the franchise game, which could help, again, from an operational standpoint, which could snowball into, success begetting success. So those are the things that I think Subway's going to have to think a lot about. And Bret, to your point, I do think with some of their menu innovation of the last year, I think that's a good I think it's a good launch pad to what could come next.
What a great note to end on. Subway, we have faith in you.
Yeah, go get him, Subway.
Go get him, kid.
Do your best.
Make lots of friends.
Be nice to everyone on the playground. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks for having me.